Yo, my people, welcome back once again. I think it's live now. It's live. Welcome back once again, the 433 Person YouTube channel in collaboration with Gunners Street. Steph, big up yourself once again. You're in the building on this lovely Monday morning. What's going on? Wonderful weekend. Massive 3 points down there at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Talk to me about that game, man. How are you feeling as an Arsenal fan?
What better feeling than waking up the next day after a North London derby win, proving that again we own Tottenham, 3 straight wins at their stadium, domination as usual. Now, yes, it wasn't the most impressive performance. We didn't go there and slap them 3 to 4 nil in the first half, but nonetheless, we come away with 3 points and goes on with our whole entire midfield missing. So, what more can you ask for?
Yeah,
What
and I
about you?
mean, you look at this win. Huh?
How's everything with you?
No, good. United played over the weekend, picked up 3 points against Southampton. I think it
Finally.
was a good a, a good performance to a certain extent. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think in the first 20, 35 minutes, Southampton dominated us. Especially that young kid coming from the academy, Diblin, off the right hand side. It gave Diogo Dalot some trouble. But overall, we got the go ahead goal with Bruno putting in a good ball in the 18-yard box. Matthias didn't get in that header, and then Garnacho came on. He was on the score sheet as well. Rashford scored a good goal, especially from the angle. I mean, Ramsdale was kind of blindsided by that ball that the shot that Rashford took that led to the goal. But fair enough to Rashford. Over the international break, you saw videos of him training. So, leading up to that game, I was like, well, let's see if the extra training is going to pay off, in which it did to a certain extent in terms of him getting back on the score sheet. His last goal in the Prem was in March earlier of this year. So it tells you that, he's not on form in any sense. But, pertaining to the Arsenal game, you guys beat Spurs, and, all the Spurs fans across the globe, they're in disarray right now. You know what I'm saying? It's like, they're in like a stress mode. People are calling for Ange Postecoglou to leave the club. And as you guys can see in the thumbnail, the question is: will Ange Postecoglou be one of the first managers to be sacked? Or I think that was what was in the thumbnail, or something like that. You know what I'm saying? But the census now is that a lot of Spurs fans want Postecoglou to get sacked. You know what I'm saying? Some people said they don't see him outlasting Erik Ten Hag and all these different types of guys. Although I think they're in the same boat. I would place a bet. Who do I think will get sacked first? I'd say Erik Ten Hag, to be honest. What do you think about that one?
Okay. To answer the question first, who I think would get sacked first? I think it
Yeah.
might be Ten Hag. Just because there's more media pressure on Ten Hag compared to Ange Postecoglou. And the only thing I will say that Ange has over Ten Hag is that you can clearly see whether it works or not, that they have an identity of how they want to play football. And I think that is kind of like a double-edged sword for Spurs and their Spurs fans, because even though, yes, they can see a clear style of play and they know what they want to do, everyone else in the Premier League knows exactly what they want to do and how they play. And it shouldn't be that any single team in this league can walk up, know how you're already going to play, have a blueprint to beat you, and still beat you. It's unacceptable, to be honest. And on one hand, I understand Spurs fans' frustration. But again, when you look at the manager market, you look at the market that Spurs would be hunting in, is there anyone better out there than the Ange Postecoglou, someone who's brought in his players, someone who's implemented the style of play so far? And not every team will be Arsenal, who's one of the best defensive teams in Europe. And people need to give Arsenal that credit. One of the best defensive teams in the world football. That's 11 straight away games without going behind once, winning 10 out of 11. So, you're going up against a really, really good team. And to be honest, it will always be difficult for Spurs and Spurs fans. But the biggest thing I say to that is it's a shame when you spend 100 million in players. You have a player like Archie Gray sitting on the bench who they haven't seen yet. Solanke can't get into any battle over Saliba or Gabriel. And then you have another the Swedish fella that they have, another midfielder that they don't play. So they've signed players and not used them. So I think that's one thing Spurs fans are very upset at.
Yeah, and sorry about that, people. I was checking what was in the thumbnail. It was I think the title of the thumbnail was "Should Man City face relegation if found guilty surrounding this trial?" I think a verdict will be in early 2025. You know what I'm saying? But the topics for today, we're going to discuss Ange Postecoglou, whether or not he should be sacked from Tottenham Hotspur, as the club is in crisis mode at this point in terms of the reaction from the fans, especially after the defeat to Arsenal. Arsenal, they didn't have Declan Rice, they didn't have Martin Odegaard, and they didn't play the best game as well. So for Spurs, they would be thinking, this is a prime or golden opportunity to beat this Arsenal team that didn't have their captain and a player like a Declan Rice, who is vital to the success of Arsenal. We're also going to discuss Manchester City as the trial begins today surrounding the 115 charges, and then we're going to talk about Erik Ten Hag. So it won't be a long show, maybe like 1 hour the most, if not 40, 50 minutes, and then we will depart. Now, Steph, Manchester City, right? We all know what's going on with City. 115 charges. The trial starts today surrounding the club, and Pep Guardiola, I saw something where he stated that whatever the outcome is, he will accept it, or they will accept it, so if it's relegation when the verdict is handed down, then they have to accept that. Obviously, if that's the case, Pep Guardiola will not be at Manchester City any longer. The likes of Erling Haaland and all these players, they will leave and go to different respective clubs, right? Now, with that being said, right, as an Arsenal fan, you guys have been challenging City for 2 years, last season and the previous season before that. Now, the charges predate or date back in, let me just pull it up on screen. It dates back to, I think it was when they just purchased Manchester City. I don't think it's when they just purchased Manchester City, but when they started to bring in like a lot of those like influx of players, and then they started to go for some like top caliber managers to a certain extent. That's when like this is dated back to, and it's 115 charges. Now, surrounding the charges, the type of charges, you have one that number of breaches within the charge. So 54 of the charges, or 54 out of the 115 charges, surrounds failure to provide accurate, up-to-date financial information from 2009-10 to and including 2017-18 season. So yeah, from 2009-2010. I think they purchased City around that time or a little bit before, and then that's where the whole influx of players started to come in, and they started to go for some managers, and they started to pay them some big money as well. So from 2009-10 season up to 2017-2018. So one of the breaches, again, it's failure to provide accurate and up-to-date financial information. Another charge surrounds 14 charges out of the 115. Failure to provide accurate financial reports for player and manager compensation from 09-10 up to 2017-18, right? And you have 5 of the charges out of the 115 surrounds failure to comply with UEFA's regulations, including UEFA's club licensing and financial fair play regulations. You have 7 more breaches of Premier League profitability and sustainability regulations from 2015-16 and including 2017-18. And you have 35 more charges, which surrounds failure to cooperate with Premier League investigation from December 2018 and present. Now, what do you have to say about these charges that Man City face? And if found guilty surrounding majority of these charges, do you think what's the best case scenario, or not the best case scenario? I mean, what's the best case scenario for the Premier League or for you as a fan of Arsenal? Would you like to see them get relegated, or do you think points deduction or them paying a fine would be good?
I'll be honest. Let me tell you what I think will happen. I think they'll beat majority of those charges due to the fact that a lot of them are lumped sum together over a course of years. For example, the one about UEFA and financial fair play, I think they'll beat that pretty easily because they already went to court for that under UEFA with the other jurisdiction. I think they might get around that if they use the proper evidence and I have a right manager. We've seen Leicester just get out of a loophole through the system. So I think City, with the top lawyers, I think City will find loopholes within this system. I think there's a lot of charges, like I said, are lumped together. So I think when it comes down to the crux of it, I don't want to wish any relegation on a team, because at the end of the day, even though they cheated, there's still fans behind that club that have been following that team through the bad years to the good years. So I don't want to wish relegation on any team just because, or whatever the case may be. It would be sad for them, but at the same time, if you cheated, you cheated. So at the same time, it is always a double-edged sword. But I don't want to wish relegation on them due to the fans. But I would have to say, if you cheated, hey, You got to face
Yeah,
repercussions.
I mean, if you do the crime, you have to do the time. You know what I'm saying? You know, in terms of the extent of the charges, 115. Some of the charges are basically copy and paste to a certain extent, right? So I feel like they'll be found guilty on some of those charges out of the 115. But whichever one they would be found guilty on, the question would be those charges, to what extent is the punishment? You know what I'm saying? Is it just paying a fine if it's a lesser charge out of the 115? Is it a type of charge if they're found guilty and where they have to, face relegation or massive points deduction across multiple seasons? These are the questions that would be asked if they're found guilty, because it's one thing to charge somebody and you can find them guilty, but what is the consequence of finding them guilty? I've seen people in a manslaughter case where they're charged for manslaughter and you're thinking mandatory 20 years or whatever the case is that the manslaughter brings. But because of some technicality or something like that, they face maybe 5 or 10 years, in which the family that is affected by that, they're saying, but that's not what we wanted. That's not harsh enough. We want 20 years and he's getting 10 years. Or sometimes, you get 5 to 10 years, you serve your first 3 and then you're on probation for the rest of your life or for the next 10 or 15 years. You know what I'm saying?
But they really put themselves in a bad situation, because when you see Everton last year get 8 points deduction for one charge or a 6-point deduction for another charge, and then other teams like Forest, I think, had some go against them as well, points deductions. When you see other teams that have had 6 to 8 to 10 points deducted for one single charge, and you look at Manchester City, where it depends on how much they're convicted of, but if you do the math of 115 and that, then they're probably going to get relegated to National League at that point. They're going to be negative over 1,000 something points, and that'll take years to come out from. But what do I think will honestly happen with Manchester City? My honest thing is, I don't think anything will happen. I think even if something happens, it will probably potentially be a fine, or it will potentially come down to them, I guess, getting relegated to the championship, maybe stripping them of a few titles. But again, they'll rebuild and be right back, I think. And Man City will come right back to the Premier League. So I don't think it will be too harsh. The harshest, I guess, in the worst case scenario, might be a relegation to the championship. But we've seen worse teams come back from the championship, honestly. So it's not all doom and gloom for Manchester City, though. Would be a crazy fall from grace.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, let me tell you, I'm not gonna talk from like a Manchester United perspective in terms of, oh, like I want them to be relegated or whatever the case is. No, I want them to be relegated in the sense that if they do the crime, then they do the time. You know what I'm saying? I'm not gonna just be like, oh, I'm a United fan, so I want them relegated, because if they're not like guilty of anything, then I wouldn't wish bad for them as a club. But the way how I see this as well, and the way how I assess the situation is that, I don't feel like the Premier League is out to get Manchester City. I feel like they've done bad over the period of time, and things are finally catching up to them. And even the UEFA situation in which they brought it to the, I think I think it was CAS, the Court of Arbitration, something like that. UEFA found them guilty, and then they brought it to some higher courts, and they basically said that you guys will get off scotch free. And one of the reasons as to why, it wasn't because that what they did was what they were accused of wasn't I think it was what they were accused of, right, by UEFA. They were guilty of that, but I think a time span did pass in which they couldn't be convicted on those charges or something like that. So that's how they basically got off, where the Premier League, they don't really have a limitation on like these charges, you know what I'm saying, or what they're laying against Manchester City.
And the same thing for Leicester. When you talk about Leicester, when they went to court recently, they had a period where their books were supposed to be turned into the Premier League. They turned them in extra early, but they were not under jurisdiction of the championship. So they were literally just a club owned by nobody. So their financial books were able to be balanced over a different period of time, evading them from any financial burden or any financial problems when they came back to the Premier League. So I think there will be a lot of loopholes you will see Manchester City find in this case. It depends on what they can get convicted of. I don't know the ins and outs. I'm not a lawyer. I don't claim to be, so I'm not going to sit up here and try to make it sound like I am. But to be honest, I think all football fans around the world can see potentially Manchester City escaping it just as well as we can see them getting relegated. So right now, it's up in the air, honestly. So we'll see what the trial says.
Yeah, and even with this City case, right? They do have a lot of money, in terms of the ownership, so they will have some of the best lawyers surrounding this. But what I know for sure is that the government in England, they did put pressure on the Premier League to get this case started, quickly, because they were of the notion that, listen, if you don't start this early, then we will step in with an independent body. to get things started out, because this is not a good look for the English Premier League. And football across England is something that is historic, that you don't want it to be tainted in a bad light with how Man City is operating. And we all know that people are they're already skeptical about the Saudis and their type of ownership and how they go about things. And if you're going to regard yourself as the best league in the world, then you should be on the forefront in terms of prosecuting teams that they breach something, or they break a rule or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Which they've done to a certain extent with Forest and Everton and some of other and some of these other teams. But when it comes to a top team like Manchester City, some people have the notion that okay, they can do it to Everton and Nottingham Forest, but will you do it to Manchester City? And money talks and bullshit walks. You know what I'm saying? But other than that, the trial starts today. We just have to sit back and wait and see what the process is like. I think I was listening to David Arnstein, and he stated that the trial will end in, or a verdict will come in early 2025. So hopefully January, February, March, somewhere around that line, we'll hear back what the verdict is surrounding Manchester City. Some people say relegation, some people say fine, some people say God knows what. You know what I'm saying? But moving on, Ange Postecoglou, right? Talked about that a little bit. Now, Arsenal did beat Spurs yesterday at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. You guys had I'm not going to say a depleted squad. You just had like two main players missing, like, Martin Odegaard, the captain, and Declan Rice. So two main players, right?
We named the bench of all under 21 players. We had Nwaneri 17, Lewis Kelly 17. We had 4 academy players who were 18 or less. We had a 16-year-old travel with the team to the North London derby, and we still rocked up at Spurs and beat them on the own home patch for 3rd straight time. You hear that sounds?
So 3 times in a row at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So as it surrounds Spurs, I've been looking at comments, and I've been listening to Spurs fans and different platforms, and visibly they're upset as well surrounding the result, because that should have been a game in which Spurs, they thought to themselves that we should have won that game. That should have been an advantage on our part to take it to Arsenal and get the 3 points, seeing that Declan Rice and a creative player like Martin Odegaard wasn't there. Now, a lot of folks there saying that, Ange Postecoglou, he has to go. They don't see him passing December as the manager for the club. Ange Postecoglou did come out after the game and stated that, he's going to win a trophy with Spurs, or he always wins a trophy in his second season. Now, it's not the Scottish Premier League. It's not any other league that Ange Postecoglou has been in. Fair enough, he has the Europa League to compete in, he has the FA Cup, and he has the Carabao Cup as well. Now, when you look at the Spurs team, I've always questioned the signings, especially recently. Brennan Johnson, I questioned that signing, too much money for that type of player. Dominic Solanke, I think that was a lot of money as well. I don't think Dominic Solanke will be scoring over 15 goals in the Prem for Tottenham Hotspur. And, it was just one season. And I don't think Solanke is a proven Premier League striker. I think he had one good season. Before that, I think he had like 5 or 7 goals in the Prem, which is not bad for a team like Bournemouth. You know what I'm saying? Once you keep that team afloat in the league, then that's good. But for me, the price tag of some of these players, even Archie Gray from the Championship as well, I'm like, you don't need a player like Archie Gray. You need you need somebody with experience. You need somebody with quality who's going to come in and change the shape of this team. Archie Gray is probably one for the future. And they have, I think, defensively, they've made good signings in the goalkeeper. I think they've made good signings in Romero. Was Romero signing under Postecoglou?
No, Romero was always there.
Players like Van der Van and Udogi. What's the next one's name? You have Udogi, Van der Van. There's a next one as well. There's a next Pedro Porro. Some of these players under Ange Postecoglou, I think defensively they've made good signings defensively. But I think when you look at the midfield and when you look at the attacking forefront, I think his signings, they've been a bit questionable in that area. Do you see Spurs potentially winning a trophy this season?
No, because I'm not gonna come on here and be that Arsenal fan to just shit on Spurs. I'm gonna give you guys actual reason as to why I think Spurs will not win a trophy. There's no way, like I said earlier, there's no way a team could plan from before, weeks from before. Anybody could turn up and say they know the game plan to beat Spurs. Spurs have to find a way to work around and beat that game plan. What they're missing is someone that's going to break down low blocks. Maddison is not that player. And I'm not saying Maddison played badly. I thought, to be honest, if there was anybody that played the best for Spurs yesterday, it probably was Maddison, to be honest. He was putting balls into the box. He was showing for it. He looked confident. But at the same time, you have no one pulling off the forward line in a Dominic Solanke to help him out and to link up the play. They're not moving the ball through the channels, and they're not taking shots at goal. So all that nullifies them is to crosses into the box. And against a team like Arsenal or against any other team that's competent enough, who likes to win headers and who wants to defend, and you have a goalkeeper who's confident at claiming crosses, it will ultimately be the downfall for a Tottenham Hotspur. I think the biggest thing that they need to look at is sorting out that midfield and how they can be a bit more inventive at breaking down low blocks. It's probably one of the most difficult things to do. And I think Arsenal went through a period of time where we struggled to break down low blocks for a little bit. But that comes with Ange Postecoglou finding a plan B. He likes to make the game stretch. He likes to make the game a basketball game. And I think that suits players like a Brendan Johnson, like a Timo Werner, like a Heung-min Son, potentially like a Dominic Solanke, who's going to get on the end of cutbacks and stuff like that and balls into the box. It all suits when the game is a basketball game. But what happens when you go up against a team that doesn't want to play that kind of way and wants to sit off? It's ultimately not going to go in your favor. And until they figure out how to break down low blocks consistently with the right players and the right personnel, I think they're not going to get any. I don't think they're getting any trophies this year. And until they fix it up, they're not getting any for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, you called some names, and Heung-min Son. I want to touch on Son a little bit. Since Harry Kane has left the club, we all know that partnership or what that partnership was like. And since Harry Kane has left, Son doesn't look like the Son that we're accustomed to. You know what I'm saying? He looks like a poor player at this moment in time in terms of you don't see that quality on a consistent basis. And, Son for me is supposed to be the main talisman in the Spurs team, like in terms of being a leader and leading in terms of quality surrounding the rest of individual players as well. And, we haven't seen that. And as I said, this was a prime opportunity in which I think, Spurs should have beaten Arsenal or should have taken the game to them a bit more. They had possession of the ball, etc. But, in terms of chance creation, etc., they're not doing that good. And it's not only against Arsenal, it's against other teams as well. We've seen that even last season. And, one criticism I have surrounding Ange Postecoglou surrounds that, well, before, let me just praise him in terms of, I think he's good with the press conferences and the media, right? But I think the downfall of Postecoglou will be his stubbornness. I think he's stubborn to a certain extent, or not to a certain extent, to a large extent, in terms of he doesn't have a plan B. It always has to be a plan A, and it just doesn't work like that. I think you have to be tactically flexible in terms of changing the shape of the team, changing your philosophy at times as well. You know what I'm saying? So for me, I think that would be the downfall of an Ange Postecoglou. But one thing I don't agree with, certain fans calling for Postecoglou to leave, because listen, what are you gonna get? You're going to rebuild again with any other manager that you get in this window, because if you look at managers out there, there are not a lot of top managers. Who you're going to get? Thomas Tuchel, who doesn't really keep a job for a long period of time, and he's going to be frustrated when he doesn't get certain signings, because he's always in problems with boards. We saw that with PSG, we saw that with Chelsea, we saw that with Bayern Munich. So he's a board guy type of problem. Once he doesn't get something, then it's an issue for him. For me, you look at Postecoglou and you look at Eddie Howe. I think Newcastle will finish higher than Spurs this season, right? Reason being, they don't have Champions League football. I think that's the main reason. But the reason why I said that as well, I think what Newcastle fans have is patience. Patience.
Do they? I've also heard some Newcastle fans get on Eddie Howe in terms of last season too, with the injuries and stuff like that, in terms of not getting Eddie Howe enough credit. I mean, the media does tend to give Eddie Howe a little bit of credit, but I think the pressure is also on Eddie Howe due to the managers, not the managers, due to the board thing above them wanting to spend. They can't get.
No, listen.
They still want to improve. If they don't,
the
season, then after getting the Champions League, 2 years missing out on European football would be literally a travesty for Newcastle. So pressure.
I wouldn't say it's a travesty. When you say missing out on European football, right?
Yeah. Again, having own I want to spend, and not getting into European football is what's going to make them be able to spend that money. So if they don't have a manager in that's going to consistently get them there, when will the big managers, and when will not the big managers, when will the big board that have all this money get to spend it? And I think that's probably what Newcastle are looking to do: consistently get European football right now.
I mean, honestly, they did get in the top four. They got in the Champions League. After that, the following season that followed, I think injuries did cost them last season. You know what I'm saying? Injuries, I think it did cost them. And when they did get back some of the players, you saw the type of Newcastle that we're accustomed to, or we saw the type of Newcastle that we're accustomed to, because they do have quality players, And, you look at Harvey Barnes coming back, scoring a good goal over the weekend. You have the players like Isak. You have players like Callum Wilson who can chip in every now and then. You have Sandro Tonali, who is coming back after a long period out of the game due to a ban. You have Bruno Guimaraes, who, he's a quality player. You have, defensively they're sound with Pope in goal, and they have Shar and some of these other guys defensively. And for me, I just feel like with them not having that Champions League football, even if they don't finish in a Champions League position, once they maintain a spot in a European position, preferably the Europa League, because I think that would suit them better compared to the UEFA Conference League. I think that would be better for Newcastle. And well, that's my main reason as to why I think they'll finish higher than Spurs, due to the fact that they don't have Champions League football. And also, I think what Newcastle fans have is patience. They don't put as much pressure on Eddie Howe right now, surrounding like, oh, he has to win a trophy or he has to finish in top 4. You know what I'm saying? I feel like with any manager that comes into Spurs, it's always like, oh, are you going to deliver a trophy? Are you going to deliver a trophy? It's never about, let's actually develop something for the first 2 to 3 seasons, and let's not talk about trophies. And then after we develop something, a philosophy, or we have a foundation, then we can start to talk about challenging for something. You know what I'm saying?
But I agree with you, but I think that also comes with this new fan space we have in terms of like fans on Twitter and fans on YouTube and stuff like that, like ourselves. When it comes to talking about who is the better club or whatever the case may be, I've seen you even talk about it before in terms of bringing up trophies in debates all the time. What Spurs fan wants to hear about winning a Carabao Cup since 2008 and nothing since what, the 90s or whenever the last won a trophy? People have grown up watching Spurs and grown adults right now that have never seen Spurs lift a trophy. Grown men have watched their team never win a single cup. And I think you can't say it's not about the fans and the expectations. Yes, I think every single manager should have the expectations of winning the trophy you come into Spurs. They've spent a lot of money. They rebuilt the stadium. They're just coming off the back where they went to the Champions League final. They challenged for a league title within the last 10 years. The expectation is that they at least bring home a Carabao Cup or a FA Cup. My brother who supports Spurs, I watch him all the time talk about so many things lacking in this team. And I think the biggest thing, like I talked about, is creators. But I think the thing about Spurs that they do have is that they have a manager in Ange Postecoglou who's stern and who believes in his stuff. What I think he's lacking, like I said, the tactical plan B and coming again and learning from his mistakes, which I think he still won't do. And I think that, like I said, would be the downfall of him. But like I said, he's a good manager. He looks like a good leader. But until he sorts that out, then I don't see anything happening for them. But in terms of finishing against Newcastle, finishing higher than Newcastle, I put Man United, I put Newcastle, I put Spurs, Chelsea. Yes, I put all of you guys in the same bracket because you're fighting for that 4th place spot. All of you guys are pretty even, but you also have something going against you that makes you not really viable for top 4. Like Chelsea, they brought in so much and they have owner crisis above them. Manchester United and the crisis they're going through with Erik Ten Hag, we will touch on that. Newcastle, like you said, with the injuries, can they sustain? Are they really that team that we saw from 2 years ago? And Spurs, they don't have a plan B, but when they are on there, they can score a lot of goals past teams. And not every team, like I said, will be Arsenal. There's some teams that are going to rock up thinking they can play against Spurs, and Spurs will beat them 3-4-0, 2-3, or something like that. It would be a crazy game. But at the same time, it's all about consistency. And until Ange brings that to the game, then I think Spurs will potentially not even win trophies. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and for me, I don't think the signings coincide with what the philosophy of the club is about.
Yes,
like I think Spurs is they're in a moment where I don't think they know which direction they want to go in. One point it looks like they want to build something, and next point it looks like they want to just go there and win something immediately, and next point it's like you don't know what. You look at the signings, the Brennan Johnson, Dominic Solanke, Archie Gray, who would have spent like 45 million on these type of signings. It's like some of them are for the future. Some of them, it looks like their current signings now. And, when I started to question Spurs when they signed Richarlison, honestly.
Okay.
When they signed Richarlison for that amount of money, I started to question the club in terms of what are you going on about? What is your ambition? Because for me, Richarlison is not a quality player. You know what I'm saying? I mean, Spurs respectively, it's a small club.
There was promise there from Richarlison years ago when he was out.
Nah, bro. They promise for clubs like Everton, bro. But if Spurs want to go up against the big boys, Spurs under Pochettino, they were always in a tight race. You know what I'm saying? Every now and then in a couple seasons, to a certain extent, even if they never finish like in second or so, that they were like third or second or 1 point in the season, they were like ahead or like behind the title winners eventually.
Spurs always think they're in something until they're not. So that's always Spurs.
But I'm just saying, under Pochettino, they were always in that mix of whether or not they could actually win the title this season. But they had the likes of Eriksen, they had the likes of Hurricane, they had the likes of Adele Ali, who was performing week in, week out when he was exceptional. You had the likes of what's his name again in the midfield? Can't remember his name, but you remember those midfielders that they used to have. They used to have Davidson Sanchez,
Dembele, yeah,
yeah,
Hussein,
Dembele.
and
Yeah, you used to have,
Armando.
Hugo Lloris in goal, who was the captain. So I'm just saying, you look at that Spurs team then compared to now, at least that team had an identity in which you could say, you know what, maybe they can challenge for a title, maybe they can make a run in a cup competition to win one of these cup competitions. But no, it's not the case with this Spurs team. You don't know which direction this Spurs team can head in, can head into. You know what I'm saying? So for me, I think Spurs fans need to stop focusing on the Arsenals of the world and the United and whether or not they're going to finish higher than Arsenal and all these comparisons. It doesn't make sense. I think they should just lay off in terms of all these comparisons and them focusing on other clubs.
Realistic. Stay off of social
Huh?
media and be realistic. I tell them stay off of social media and be realistic.
Yeah, and I think that's the case surrounding Spurs as to what they should do in terms of don't push the issue, don't force the issue. Calling for Postecoglou to get sacked, it just doesn't make sense. It's premature. You know what I'm saying? You have top four. Try to finish in a Europa League position for next season. Try to finish in the top four for next season. Make that your ambition. I think the pressure should be around that.
Oppose this to you though, Presser. I think I still not getting around the plan B effect. We could talk about, like I said, we could talk about so much, but if there's a blueprint out there to beat you, and everyone can see it, there's clearly never a time Ange Postecoglou is going to change. So again, how will they end up being this good team projects them to be in a few years? How would they get there if they can't even establish the base right now in terms of being a good team along the way? I don't know. I don't know if it's sustainable under this manager, honestly, with his stubborn ways, I should say.
That's what I said. For me, the key word comes down to patience. I think they have to exert patience surrounding Postecoglou in terms of like developing something. You know what I'm saying? And I think, to be fair to the Spurs fans, I think they're running out of patience, especially when Pochettino was there and they went a couple seasons without like making a major signing or a signing at that. They had a transfer window in which they never make any signing out of almost every other club. So that's one reason as to why the patience of the fans at Spurs, it's running thin. And I think with Postecoglou, no, I think he's a great guy. I think he's a good manager. But again, him not having a plan B, him not learning to adjust, I think that will eventually be his downfall at this club. And to be honest, like the fans at Spurs, I think they're the only club in the Prem where, as they start to make up noise about a manager being sacked, they get them out early. United, our fans tend to make up noise a lot, but a manager still sticks around for some reason. They might win a trophy or something down the line that keeps them in the job. But you saw in the Moreno where fans were really frustrated and Moreno left early. You saw under Antonio Conte. Exactly. You saw, under Antonio Conte and Jose Mourinho. They didn't spend more than 2 seasons at Spurs, right? I think they were both sacked in their second season. Yeah, see, so as things become bad, the fans say, listen, we're unhappy. And, Spurs, it was never about the trophy for them. It was always about the style of play and identity. Jose Mourinho didn't really have identity. Antonio Conte didn't really, maybe to a certain extent, he had an identity. But his problem was him coming out and talking about certain stuff that Mourinho did the same thing. So it eventually cost him the job as well, but it is what it is surrounding in Spurs and Ange Postecoglou in that sense. But listen, Steph, we're coming to the end of the show. We have to run. I was going to talk about Erik tonight, but I just got a message and got to run on the road eventually. But thanks for being on. We're going to be here maybe Wednesday again, if not next week. Maybe next week again, possibility. So big up to yourself, Steph. Big up to Gunner Street as you were out there in the streets interviewing Arsenal fans after the victory against Spurs. So big up to the people that came on the channel as well and shared their thoughts surrounding that. People, until next time, stay safe and have a good day.